It's me. Sorry. What did your foot look like?
Backwards.
It's a call kid. He's kidnapped. He's in the house on Highway U. Both his legs are broken and his ankle. Here, Joe, come back in that case. He says, no, just get me out of here as soon as you can.
This is 13-year-old Thadius Phillips. He and his family had just moved to Baraboo, Wisconsin. It was a small, safe town where families could leave their doors open on warm summer nights. Or so they thought. Thad went through a living hell throughout a weekend in July 1995. When officers found him, he was 2 hours away from death. It was simply shocking he had survived so long. What helped Thad keep his will to live? How did he manage to escape the House of Horrors? And who was the monster behind it all? We'll explore these questions and many more in today's video. But be warned, some very graphic details ahead. On July 14, 1995, Thadius Phillips, his parents, Connie and Donald, and his sister arrived in Baraboo, Wisconsin. It was going to be a peaceful life, the family thought. The kids could play outside and make friends in this community of young families and young teens. So 2 weeks later, the Phillips were enjoying a hot summer evening by watching a TV show. All 4 of them. Thad and his sister fell asleep on the sofa, and their parents let them rest as they went into a different room. A few hours later, Thad was picked up and carried away. Half asleep, he assumed it was his dad carrying him into his bedroom.
And I opened up my eyes a little bit, and I'm being carried through my den in our new house, and it's nothing really new to me because my mom and dad carried me to bed when I'd fall asleep before.
But Thad was being carried outside, then into another house. When he opened his eyes a minute later, he was outside the home of one of his neighbors. A large teenage boy put him down and told him to follow him inside. If he would have been any older, Thad thinks he would have made a run for it. But the boy was just a few years older than him, albeit several feet and pounds larger. So, as if through a trance, Thad just followed him indoors.
I don't know how to explain that. I can't explain that. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why.
The boy seemed to be home alone, but his home looked like any teenager's home. A bit messy, but filled with posters, car models, and snacks. Also, the boy just seemed like he wanted a friend.
Being the nicest guy in the world. Talking about models and baseball cards and football cards, and that's what I was into at the time.
Half a mile away from Thad's home, this boy introduced himself as Joe and told Thad he was getting ready to throw a party. He said the names of a few other boys who Thad already knew. Knowing they would soon be at Joe's house too, Thad even got a little excited. However, Joe asked Thad if he wanted to see his card collection upstairs. Thad followed and everything changed.
We were sitting on his bed. He was sitting next to me. And just all of a sudden he stood up.
Joe grabbed Thad with all his might and threw him on the bed again. Then he grabbed his right foot and twisted it backward. Thad was in a state of shock. He was barely coming to terms with what had just happened, but he was very much aware that he needed to get home. So as Joe pulled back and started mumbling to himself, Thad ran downstairs and headed toward the front door. At this point, he felt more shock than pain and didn't realize he wouldn't get very far with a broken ankle.
Kind of looked away, and as soon as he looked away, I got up and ran as fast as I could down the stairs. Can't run very fast with a broken ankle. But I got down the stairs and through his living room into the kitchen before he finally caught up to me and got behind me and put me in a hole, dragged me back into his living room.
Joe broke Thad's femur and hip bone, and poor Thad passed out. When he woke up again, Joe was sitting next to him on the couch. Now, he wanted to be friends again. Thad was scared and confused. He asked Joe why he would do something like this to him. It wasn't personal, Joe explained. He just really liked breaking bones.
He enjoyed breaking bones. He enjoyed the sound of breaking bones.
He talked as if he had no choice but to snatch kids from their homes and subject them to this. He showed no empathy toward Thad, and he didn't feel his pain. He was his toy now. Joe told Thad to get some sleep. But how could you sleep through the pain of a broken hip? Also, Thad was not your average 13-year-old kid. He never wallowed in his pain. His only thought was survival.
Thad is a pretty straightforward kid, and he didn't want to die. So he was willing to do what it would take.
So, as Joe was not around, Thad began studying every corner of the house that he could see from the sofa. He was looking for weapons, phones, and anything that could help him escape. Apart from moldy leftovers and piles of dirty clothes, though, there was nothing in sight. Then, he tried to get off the couch, and only then did the pain truly kick in. Shivers went through his body as he was left paralyzed with unspeakable pain for the entirety of the night, while Joe slept upstairs. Thad didn't sleep for 1 second. One part of him hoped that the terror was over.
A little bit of me maybe thought that maybe he was gonna let me go that next morning, but that was never his intention. I was pretty much sure there was people like that in the world. I just didn't think they'd live half a mile away from me.
Yeah, that's a really disturbing thought. The next morning, Thad asked Joe if he could call his parents. To his surprise, Joe said sure and even handed him the phone. As Thad dialed their number and held the phone close to his ear, expecting it to ring, he heard Joe laughing in the background. He'd cut off the cord if you thought Joe couldn't get more evil. But Thad was so intent on surviving the ordeal that he didn't even express his anger. He acted as if Joe's so-called joke was funny and tried to befriend him.
That's exactly what I was trying to do, is to talk to him, maybe kind of be friends with him so he wouldn't want to hurt me no more. I was just hoping to hear a knock on the door, and it'd be my dad at the door, but that never happened.
For 2 hours, they watched TV together. Then, just as the day before, Joe stood up and looked at Thad with a manic, enraged look. He picked him up and carried him upstairs. Then he did to his left leg what he'd done to his right one before. Thad felt adrenaline before anything, so he got up and fought back.
Punched him in the back, and he turned around and put a pillow over my face and told me that if I didn't stop fighting, he's gonna break my back or my neck.
So, from that point on, Thad didn't fight back anymore. He decided to do what he was told, and he kept thinking of ways to escape that place. After shattering both his legs to pieces, Joe then sat down next to Thad. Just as he'd presented his baseball card collection, he now wanted to show Thad another collection. He had leg braces, bandages, and piles of white socks stuffed in his drawers. He explained that he loved fixing bones after breaking them.
There was some childlike almost fascination with making him right, so then he could just, again, continue to do torture. He had that, forgive the term, captive audience for as long as he wanted. The fun is in making him dysfunctional again.
So Joe put Thad in the leg braces and wrapped several socks around his feet, spending minutes with each sock, obsessing over it being perfect. Imagine how disturbing this must have been for poor Thad. Throughout the day, Joe switched between fixing and hurting Thad. In the evening, he announced he'd be going out and left Thad on his bed upstairs. But before Joe left, Thad heard him speaking to someone downstairs. He listened closely. Was someone else inside the home, or was Joe on the phone? He was on the phone. This meant that there was another phone in the house, apart from the one with the cut cord. This was his only chance at freedom. Joe knew it was risky to leave Thad home alone, but he had a plan.
Before he left Saturday night, he made sure that he busted me up pretty good so that I wouldn't try to leave.
However, Joe never suspected just how intent Thad was on surviving. When he heard the front door close behind Joe, Thad began his plan. He crawled out of bed and dragged his body up the staircase. His legs weren't working. His only hope were his two hurting arms. When he tried to slide down the stairs with his legs first, Thad passed out from pain. So, when he woke up, he realized there was only one way to do it.
Myself down the stairs, and I dragged myself in the living room. And this took, I don't know how many hours it took, but I kept passing it and out and out.
It's impossible to imagine such pain if you've never been through it. Thad made it to the kitchen doorway when Joe returned home with his girlfriend.
Thinking be smart, don't make him mad. So I'm laying there and I'm listening and I'm being quiet as hell.
Poor Thad was paralyzed with pain and fear, hidden behind the door, all the while listening to Joe flirt and smooch with a girl. After the girl left, Joe found Thad hiding behind the doorway. If things could get any worse for Thad, they did that night. You might be thinking, at this point, Thad has been missing for 24 hours. Wasn't anyone looking for him? Yes, they were. As soon as Thad was gone, his parents realized someone had taken him, or at least convinced him to go out with them. Connie and Donald got into their car and started driving through the town. Then they exited the town and drove around it, hoping to see their son or at least a clue pointing them to him. Ironically, they never thought to check door to door down their street.
We drove around and looked around. We went out to the river and I searched the fairgrounds. Just never thought to check house to house because we didn't know any of the neighbors right close. So if I would have probably found him before he was hurt as bad as he was.
On Saturday evening, Connie and Donald filed a missing person report. The officers visited the Phillips home and looked for evidence of foul play. They found nothing, so they just told the family to stay close to the phone in case they made any breakthroughs.
Just couldn't believe what's going on, about what's going on. I didn't know what to think. I just wanted to hear from him.
The next morning, Joe woke Thad up with promises of punishment for trying to escape the night before.
He's jumping on my legs with his knees, and I was just trying to talk to him to keep him away from me.
One of Thad's questions for Joe that day is if he'd done this to anyone before. Joe was convinced Thad would die that weekend, so he proudly confessed that he'd taken the lives of a few boys before. This was in line with an ongoing investigation at the time. In July 1994, 1 year prior, a 14-year-old boy named Chris Steiner went missing. He'd gone to bed early on the 4th of July weekend. His dad saw him asleep and closed his bedroom door. But just an hour or two later, someone took him from his bed. The following morning, Chris's parents called 911, realizing he was nowhere in or around the house. The officers noted that the usually locked patio door was open, and Chris's window screen was cut up. The muddy footprints in their yard were larger than Chris's too. Clearly, this was an abduction case. But for about a week, the detectives found nothing. On July 10th, however, tragic news reached Chris's family.
We found a body floating, partially submerged. It was immediately apparent that the body was in very poor condition. It was in an advanced state of decomposition.
Officers had to find Chris's killer fast and try their best to put the small town of 11,000 people at rest. But the only name that came up was obtained by Chris's parents after asking around Chris's school and their neighbors. The name was Joseph, or Joe, Clark, a local teenage bully. He was violent and had a knack for targeting younger teenage boys. But this wasn't enough for the officers to arrest him.
Well, hearsay, nobody could give me something that directly stated that, yeah, they heard from Joe Clark directly that this is what he said.
So the case went cold. By now, Thad heard Joe say he'd taken Chris's life. Joe was proud of his previous deeds, and he was excited to take Thad's life soon too. But Joe was also waiting for his girlfriend to come over that night, and Thad knew this. So as Joe was trying to attack him some more, Thad stalled by claiming he could hear the girlfriend.
I'd say, I can hear something.
Eventually, Joe's girlfriend did come, so Joe locked Thad inside a closet. At this point, all the shattered bones in Thad's legs were causing internal bleeding to build up. Within hours, he could be gone. As the pain got worse and worse, Thad realized death was imminent, and this would be his last chance as survival. So he looked around the closet and found an old electric guitar. With whatever power he had left, he smashed the guitar through the closet door.
Busted a panel off the door and was able to unlock it.
Thad crawled down the hallway and threw himself down the stairs, passing out repeatedly, but refusing to give up. Finally, he made it to the kitchen where he found the phone on the wall. He tugged its cord and the phone fell down. Luckily, the buttons were on the phone, and Thad dialed 911.
He was so calm and collected that I felt he was playing a prank.
Better not be a joke. I'm sorry about that. He said, no, he said, just get me out of here as soon as you can.
Police! Dad? We're here. It's me. Sorry.
I can't believe the kid busted out of there. Can't believe he's still alive.
When the officers found Thad, almost every bone in his body was broken. He was swollen and his skin was violet. The paramedics concluded he had 1 or 2 hours left to live if he didn't get to the phone that night. Thad was a superhero through and through. The minute his parents met him in the hospital room, he told them he wasn't the first victim. They had to convict Joe for every life he'd taken. At last, Joe was officially connected to Chris Steiner's death, and possibly other victims too. Thad's only wish was to get well soon so he could testify against Joe.
And what did your foot look like?
Backwards.
Joe just stood there with a dumb look on his face. His attorney went for an insanity defense and claimed Joe didn't remember anything, but he wouldn't get away with it. The prosecutor pulled out Joe's dirty school book from the evidence bag and read aloud.
There were 3 sheets of paper. There were 3 lists. One was called Get to Know. One was called Can Wait. And one was called Leg Thing. There were lists of boys on each of those.
Joe wanted to make a career out of this. Around this time, he earned the chilling nickname Bonebreaker. He was sentenced to life plus 100 years in prison, and Thad testified in both his trial and the trial of Chris Steiner. Shockingly, just before Chris's trial, Thad was shot twice by 15-year-old Michael Hubish, a friend and neighbor of Joe's. Again, Thad survived, and he carried on with Chris's trial. People like Thad are rare. His will to live was almost supernatural, and it was all due to his love for his family. Now, he has his own family and the knowledge that he helped put a monster behind bars forever. Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know of other similar stories? Leave a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe. On to the next time.